Warhammer Darktide is a classic case of style over substance, where it shows elements of greatness but lacks the invention to leave a long-lasting impression, which is a shame because the graphical prowess, the utter mayhem on display, and the rich lore that Warhammer Darktide houses should make this an easy hitter, but instead it's very much one destined for the shitter. So grab your axe, buckle into your seats, and let's look at why Warhammer is perhaps a game to avoid, but only in its current state. Today's review is on PC, which is important to note because there are sadly some glaring issues in the graphics department which Reggie will talk about later. Likewise, before you nerds come at me with your pitchforks, understand that Reggie knows nothing about the lore of Warhammer, but that in itself is a good thing because it's a good test of how a game like Darktide can get newcomers like me and Johnny Two Shoes involved, and on initial impressions things start out positive. You are asked to create a character, but unlike other 4-player online co-op games, the character you create feels a little bit more personal to you, where you select a backstory and class, which means that your voice acted character will react differently to those around you. There isn't a ton of cosmetic style to pick from for your character in the early days, but you suspect that is down to the wealth of unlockables that lay before you. So off you go straight into the prologue, and here is where the first cracks start to show. Now, there is nothing wrong with the prologue per se, it teaches you the basics like most games do, but you can't help but shift the feeling that the depth of the combat is laid bare for all to see, which is that you mash the melee button countless times to defeat your enemy. Reggie's interest did peak though when he saw a suppression firing mechanic come into play, where enemies dart for cover when shot upon, and I thought to myself, here we go boys, a proper 4-player online co-op game that is going to offer some tactical nuance on top of what looks like a lot of mayhem. Sadly though, when you get past the bare bones tutorial and play online for the first time with others, you quickly realise that you never go into that tactical mode, but instead you are more likely to resemble a foaming Sarah Palin who is willing to batter anyone to death before her. And yes, I say Sarah Palin with good reason, people, because this is who the cyber gods blessed me with in my first ever game, and I watched Sarah as she went about the gaff in this beautifully realised world with her sword battering enemies into pulp, and I was thinking to myself, what exactly is Sarah doing here that is so smart? And that's when it dawned on me that Warhammer Darktide is really just a melee button mash 'em up, and it's this lack of inventiveness that really holds it back. To rewind a little bit here though, your character is given 2 weapons, a melee weapon and a gun weapon, and as you level up your character you get some dosh which you can spend in between rounds at a safe haven hub, similar to what you have in games like Destiny or Deep Rock Galactic. Each level will have a set of objectives, usually culminating in an end boss or a set piece type gig where hordes of the enemy come towards you. Now the issue I have here is that the beautifully realised environments are just that. You cannot really interact with them. As an example, in Back 4 Blood, you'll have choke points that you want to use to your advantage, you'll clamour on top of cars or buildings to get a vantage point, and indeed create basic defences. In Deep Rock Galactic, the very environment you are around can be mined and climbed accordingly to get the edge. Not in Warhammer Darktide though, as you almost feel like you're constrained to a wheelchair, where even jumping up the most simple of ledges appears almost impossible for your reject of a character. The game design stunts any thoughts you may have of being a tactical genius in tackling these swarms of enemies, which really comes to the next point, which is how little challenging those enemies are. Yes, there are plenty of them, but you have your usual suspects here with a special enemy that is super quick, a special enemy that explodes when you're near it, or one that can incapacitate you. It just feels like in the world of Warhammer with its rich lore that they could have really gone to town with creating far more interesting and challenging cannon fodder than what feels like reskins from games of yesteryear. If playing on a PC like Reggie, then realise you will press your left mouse button hundreds upon hundreds of times as if your mum is walking in on you watching Pornhub. You can't click fast enough on the little cross to shut down the video of Sasha Grey, can you filthy dog? Well, Warhammer is similar because you'll be mashing your way around like a lunatic as wave of enemies come towards you. That leaves us to discuss the weapons, because with all this mashing and sporadic shooting from your gun, surely the key part to keep you going is collecting epic weapons with stunning looks and monstrous destruction. Sadly, they all look and feel samey. In fact, you don't really care like you should to earn these rewards, and very quickly you start to see the grind take place as you complete mission after mission to earn a bit more cash to buy a similar looking gun, giving just a bit more damage. But where the real lack of inventiveness shows is in the mission design. Again, I go back to the likes of Back 4 Blood, where there are some rather wonderful set pieces to play with and things feel alive, or indeed the same can be said for Destiny. But not here, people, God no. Instead, you're left with a monotony of basic fetch mechanics to put X item into X socket, to activate X piston to open X door. Again, it just baffles me with such a rich lore backing it that we didn't have more spectacular set pieces here. And the missions aren't that difficult either, because generally speaking, you'll upgrade your mundane weapons each time to tackle more challenging difficulties. And so it's really a case of bashing that mouse button again and again with the foaming Sarah Palin by your side. The sense of monotony creeps in real fast, and you wish you were watching a goalless ball draw in the World Cup. Let's talk graphics, shall we? And as mentioned, Reggie here is playing on PC, and what a delightful PC it is, because Johnny Two Shoes acquired me an RTX 3080, 32GB RAM, an i9 900K, and of course I'm playing with a solid state drive. Not saying it's the bee's knees in today's world, but certainly it's a proper gaming rig that can handle most of what is thrown at it at ultra settings at 4K. But not here, because Warhammer Darktide is an unoptimised, unpolished mess of a game, which is fucking criminal, because visually it's stirring, is at times beautiful, and it reminds me very much of the tech demos you used to get in 3D Mark. It's another case of a developer no doubt rushing out a game to meet tight deadlines set by publishers, and because of that it leaves a bad taste in your mouth. So where do we start? Well, players get stuck. You're crashing the game a lot. You'll see players have convulsions whenever in an elevator as they shake about the place. Blood randomly moves around walls and floors if on moving objects, and worst of all, even with high-powered rigs, the game tops out at 30-40 frames per second with sudden jumps all over the place, even on low settings. Yes, I get it, I record in 4K, but I see that very much as the norm for a lot of gamers today, especially in the console world. And if I can hit 60 frames a second in far more demanding games than Darktide, then I have to question why even on low settings the game struggles. Clearly then, this needed an additional 6 months baited in the development oven to get things where they needed to get to. It destroys all good parts of the visuals, and smoke my bloater, people. There is a lot of good things to say here, which is why it's so frustrating to witness. Visually it looks phenomenal at times, with huge detailed structures and high fidelity textures popping through to give a rawness to the world. The lighting is absolutely phenomenal, even with ray tracing turned off, and the volumetric effects are bang on, as smoke and an almost foggy type haze settles further out into the distance. When shit is hitting the fan, you're going to see waves of enemies on you, and you'll see limbs fly off and heads get decapitated with blood gashing anywhere and everywhere. From an eye candy standpoint, it's wonderful stuff, people, but also totally wasted in the current unoptimised and buggy mess it finds itself in. And then we come back to that lack of inventiveness again. Sooner or later you're going to realise the prettiness of the levels actually repeat upon themselves, with reused assets creeping up everywhere, and lo and behold, you'll also repeat missions quickly too. It's a real shame then, because all of the ingredients are here to make this a stunning visual feast, but instead you'll feel like you just pulled a 10 out of 10 bird down the pub, only for a breath to stink of a donkey's arsehole. Reggie here actually thinks this game would have benefited from less enemies, make them tougher but fewer, make the demands less on the engine, give opportunity for more tactical gameplay, and give your artists more opportunity to use the environment in more exciting ways. Game developers need to step away from this trendy idea that we all want billions of enemies rushing towards us constantly on screen to showcase a game engine. Less is more sometimes, and this is a classic case of it. As for sound, I have no complaints here. In fact, I only have praise. I mentioned I'm not a Warhammer fan, but I love what I heard here, with brilliant scripted segments and well acted out cutscenes. The interplay with characters when shit is hitting the fan is superb, and the thud of your melee weapon splitting a head open is all too satisfying to take. The musical score is bloody good too, with stirring little instruments and some high tempo beats as enemies come towards you. It sounds believable, and is perhaps the only part of Warhammer Darktide that had true polish. So Warhammer Darktide feels like an early access game, and it should be too, because it needed more time. And if I review this in a year, then maybe I'll see a lot of improvements with optimizations, bug quashes, a less grindy affair, and hopefully some more unique missions. But they are charging you a rather handsome sum of money here, and so we have to judge it with that in mind. and so it's not really a game I can recommend in its current form, which is a shame because actually I get why people like the Warhammer franchise, as clearly there is something to be said here about the rich world that's been created. Until next time, my lovelies, have a lovely day. Reggie out.